Hi, everyone. It's great to be here in Cannes. Ethereum is winning, which is great to see. Super lively week. My name's Yaniv. I'm the founder of The Graph, and most recently Geo. Founded The Graph back in 2017, and have been working to help build Web3 ever since. Today, we're going to be talking about building Web3 apps. And I'd like to start by just asking you, what apps do you use every day? In your work, in your personal life. Think about the apps that you spend your day using. And how many of those apps are Web3? I'm guessing it's probably a low amount, right? The vast majority of the apps that we use are Web2 apps, which means that they're run by these companies that control your data, that make the rules, right? They lock you in. We're kind of very familiar. A lot of people, in the space have been working to kind of build this new web, and maybe we can look a little bit at, what these missing pieces were and what it would take to realize this vision. I'd like to start by taking you back to 2007, 2010, when the iPhone first came out and kind of the early days of mobile. If you remember this period, there were tons of apps coming out all of the time, right? Super exciting time to be building. There'd be new apps launching all the time, and you would try them out, right? And I think there was something about this period that was magical, and people would try the new app of the day, they would talk about it, but something has kind of happened since that time, right? And kind of, what is that? I mean, a lot of the apps that you tried just kind of, at some point, stopped working for some reason or another, right? Maybe a company got acquired, it got shut down, and the app that you thought was super cool, was no more, right? And if I have another app that I use stop working, I'm gonna go ham. It's not a good experience. They're like, what the F? This was, my app, I was using this. And, I think that's part of what we can do with Web3, right? Is build these apps that persist, that users have control over. But we need to make these apps dependable. So imagine if the apps that you use were open and interconnected, and you weren't trapped in these silos. You could just post things and have your own workflows that you want for how you post things and how you consume things. And people can remix it, and you can have really beautiful custom interfaces where really you're in control, and none of the content that you create is trapped in these centralized platforms. Now, that's what we want to create. One kind of example that we can look at to give us a little bit of a taste of how this type of a thing could work is in these kind of areas on the iPhone. So health, photos, and contacts are three areas where there's pretty robust operating system APIs. So any app can easily access your photos, your contacts, right? These sorts of things. The data itself is managed by the OS. And if an app wants to use it, it asks you for permission, right? You get a little screen, you can accept or reject, but that makes this data composable across applications. And I think it's a good way to get an intuition for how composability across apps can kind of be handled. But to do that, you need standards, right? ERC20 has been an incredibly successful standard that really enabled DeFi to take off, right? This one standard made it so you could have lots of different smart contracts and DeFi protocols that all can exchange value, right? You have this primitive for composable value, and that really enabled the birth of DeFi. And similarly, we need the same thing for information, to make any arbitrary information composable across applications so that you can have different applications writing and different applications reading that data, and they can all understand each other. So for that, you need standards, and what we need is a standard for composable information, which we're going to find out is actually really knowledge. But what is knowledge? Data is the raw bits that you have on disk or in a database on a wire. And when you interpret and structure that data, it becomes information. So information is what most of us are used to, looking at tables, either in a database or in a spreadsheet, right? Like structured information, you know what the fields are, that's information. And knowledge is when you connect all this information together. And you can think of it, it's actually basically linking and labeling information. But what it does is it creates context and interconnections between all of this information. And to have knowledge, it's a really free-form kind of thing, right? So you're moving away from structure and you're creating interconnected information, which becomes knowledge. And so we recently introduced a knowledge standard called GRC20, and it is basically entities and relations are the building blocks of the GRC20 standard. So you can describe any kind of information as entities with relations between those entities. On top of that, we add these types. So it's a loose kind of type system that's really flexible, and that gives a little bit of structure to your information. But using this standard, you can build apps that have composable information across different applications. So that's what forms a knowledge graph. Now, raise your hand if you're familiar with the concept of knowledge graphs. All right, pretty good. Yeah, so the idea is getting out there, and they're becoming super popular in the world of AI because you want your AI to be able to understand more and more complex things. And since a knowledge graph is such a flexible way of representing information, you can train your AI to understand more and more. You can use these knowledge graphs as a sort of working memory for your AI that gets smarter over time. And with this, we can just better represent the world, right? The world's a super dynamic place. So if you try to structure everything up front and say, these are the fields that matter, that's going to go out of date like right away, right? So with knowledge graphs, we have something that can evolve with the world, and we can better represent the world, and we can build applications that navigate and browse these knowledge graphs and let people update them. And this is really going to be the model, we believe, that's going to enable this like open, interconnected web to thrive. So we started with GRC20, and today I'm excited to announce the next step in this journey, which is Hypergraph. Hypergraph is a new framework. It's a local-first framework for building composable Web3 consumer apps. We've been building the graph for many years. A lot of you are probably familiar with it, and when you think the graph, you probably think blockchain data. But most of the apps that you use every day are not necessarily like public data that's going to be on a blockchain, right? A lot of it is private. And it's not like traditionally like blockchain data. And so with Hypergraph, we want to enable a new category of consumer apps that are Web3, that include public as well as private and shared data that people can build really great consumer apps with. And we know the privacy thing is actually really important for a lot of people. When they heard about Web3, like this is what they were excited about: privacy and like owning your own data, right? And we know that the web giants, they want to hoover up all of your data, they want to make it theirs, but we can provide tools for app developers to help kind of counter that trend and give people control over their data again. And Hypergraph is interconnected, so your app doesn't live in a silo, right? It interconnects with all the other apps, and so as more people build apps, your apps can get more powerful, and people benefit when people are using your apps. So all of this stuff, we can build things that really reinforce each other and help to create like a really great user experience. Hypergraph has real-time sync, so this is becoming kind of table stakes for a lot of consumer apps, right? If you use apps like Notion or Figma, you're used to this, right? Where different people can write things and it updates right away on your device. And having these open systems where anybody can kind of write anything This is supposed to be a video. It's not playing. But you guys know this guy, our friend Rick. This is a problem with open systems, right? Like anybody can write anything. Like how do you stop from getting Rickrolled? You know, this is actually one of the big issues that we need to solve with these open systems. You can imagine if you had like a Google Sheets or a Notion that was open that anybody could write to, it would probably take about 2 seconds before somebody pulled one of these on you. And then, so this is one of the things that we've been spending over the last 5 years. Me and my team have gone really deep on how do you structure knowledge to be composable across applications, and how do you curate it so that it can be open and meritocratic. You can open things up, have it be decentralized, but not have it just get overrun. And it's a really deep problem, and I'm probably going to be going much deeper on this in a future talk. Okay, so what's the architecture? How does this stuff work? So your app, for the private and shared stuff, it uses CRDTs, and we use auto-merge for the CRDTs. And the data with those CRDTs is encrypted. Now, we have a sync server that's part of this, and the sync server's job is basically to push updates to the different clients that have permissions. And so that gives you kind of the real-time sync. Your client could go offline, and when it reconnects, the sync server pushes the updates to it. So you have this kind of a mode for your kind of private and your shared collaboration. And we think this is a really good, tasteful kind of trade-off in architecture for really great UX while ensuring privacy. And then if you do want to publish knowledge to actually be public, you encode that as gRC20. That gets uploaded to IPFS and then published on chain. So you can actually batch any arbitrary amount of updates to the knowledge graph in a single on-chain transaction. That can get published either to a personal space or a public space. So personal spaces are spaces that you control. That can be your own personal website, a company site, anything like that. And then we have public spaces, which is where we want to help more and more people get to a shared set of facts. And we think that that's a really important part of what Web3 is going to help accomplish, to help people better understand what's happening in the world and get to agreement. And we think that public spaces are an important part of this as well. So let's dive in a little bit more into these sync servers and this kind of private architecture. So we have a piece of this that is the Connect app. And that is most similar to what I was showing with the Apple iOS stuff, right? You have a system thing that grants access to these private spaces. And that is how you allow different applications to access private data, right? So the user is in control. The user has to grant access to the private data, right? Like the health kit or the contacts kind of example. The user has a top-level identity, and then they create app-specific identities from that. And that is what you use to encrypt and decrypt messages within your shared groups. So with these building blocks, having private and public data that's interconnected, enabling privacy, and enabling shared collaboration, we think these are the pieces that we need to enable Web3. And people have been talking about Web3 for a long time, right? I mean, we started the graph in 2017. And I think the reason people care about this stuff, one, we want to give people more power and control over their lives. And we also want to coordinate to solve big problems in the world. With these tools, I think we really do have the pieces that we need to realize this vision. So we're going to be here all week. I'm giving a talk at Pragma on Thursday, where I'm going to be going into a lot more detail about Hypergraph, showing some example apps. So this will be a really great place to be to learn more about Hypergraph. We're going to be at ETH Global this weekend, giving out prizes to people who want to hack on Hypergraph, building consumer apps, or publishing knowledge using GRC20. And if you're building an app in the space, we would love to help you. I think we're at a place now where there's huge opportunity to build breakthrough consumer apps. And I think the way we're going to do that is to really realize the vision of Web3, right? Nobody wants another siloed app. And I think the issue that we've had is we've kind of stayed stuck in these silos, right? Even in Web3, you build an application, and if you structure it in a way that's just for your app, we're not really realizing that vision. But if instead we really give users the power, we really make it so that they can take their data with them, between applications, so they're not locked in. It's all interconnected, and now they also have privacy. We think we can build something that's like way better than the old web, and the time is now. And my hope is that maybe by this time next year, when I look at all of the apps that I'm using on a daily basis, they're all going to be Web3 apps. And I can tell you, speaking for myself, I'm never going to want to go back. Right? So for the next year, if you want to build an app like this, this is going to be, our main focus, and we'd love to help you be successful. If you want to learn more, we've got the Hypergraph docs are up at this URL. You can start to read more. We're going to be open sourcing the repo on Thursday, and we'll be around all week if you want to chat. Thank you. I think we have time for some questions. Okay.
And what can I push to the world?
Yeah, so the question was what data should stay private and what data should be public, and that's really up to the app developer. Right? The app developer is going to ultimately write the code. Now the user should be able to select the space, right? And that's using that Connect app where they can basically say, okay, let's say it's health data. Here's my private health space that I want you to write this data to. Or whatever type of data, you could do DMs this way and write like a messaging app or anything else. So the user can select the private space that they want the app to write to. And my hope is that a lot of these apps will also get audited, right? They could be open source so you can see exactly what they're doing. But that way, the user can be in control. So I think a lot of the data is going to be private, right? Obviously, if you're working internally, your personal stuff, people do not need to have access to all of that. But I also hope that more and more data becomes public as well. That as we have better tools for coordinating, that work that maybe would have been internal to companies become more publicly accessible so more and more people can work together to accomplish societal goals.
Yeah, I have two questions, if possible. So the first one is, you mentioned that all this data is going to be interconnected. But what if, as an app developer, I want some of it to be siloed? Say, for example, I'm talking about tokens that are on-chain. And maybe there are lots of people already pushing information about these tokens. But I don't want that information to leak into my graph because I'm building very specific kind of that data set.
Totally. Well, so there's a few parts there. The app developer can use whatever query they want. So it should be very easy to filter out stuff that you don't want. Part of what we want to do is also enable data pipelines so that you can have public spaces or spaces that are aggregating data that you have really control over that aggregation. So that could be a way to accomplish kind of what you're talking about. But I think in general, you do want the stuff to be interconnected because if somebody else is trying to query information about one of those tokens, it could be useful to them to know the information that's on your app, right? And then they can see maybe I should use that app or I can pull that in. So I think in general, what we want to have is globally unique IDs for every entity, right? Anything, person, place, like should have like an ID that represents their public thing. So if we're talking about the same thing, we can know that we're talking about the same thing. And that's what makes it interconnected.
And sorry, just because this was a perfect transition into my second question about global IDs. How do you guarantee that we don't have duplicates? Like someone says something about USDC, the token USDC, and they push it and they give it an ID. And I want to say something, and I don't know if someone already mentioned it.
That's a great question. And it comes down to governance, which I want to give a whole talk into how we organize spaces and subspaces and help communities organize and curate information, which is how we get rid of duplicates and make sure that everything is organized really well. All right, thank you so much.